The following content is meant purely for educational and informational purposes and should not be relied upon as financial, investment, legal, tax, or any other professional advice. This is the Fundamentals podcast, where we demystify crypto and help you navigate this ever-evolving internet-native economy. In this episode, we're joined by Jesse Pollak, the creator of Base. Our conversation dives into the details behind moving Coinbase on-chain, building Base as a company within a company, and combining the strengths of Coinbase and Optimism to create a global on-chain economy. We speak about Base's lean and engineering-driven team structure, the purpose of economic alliances between chains, pioneering governance strategies, the need for standardizing metrics in our industry, and the paradigm shift that building on-chain enables for decision-making, product development, and more efficient business operations. Tune in for a great discussion about the fundamentals of Base and building on-chain. Quite funny, actually, the tab that I clicked into this interview from was letsgetjessebald.com. That was a domain I wasn't expecting to see today, but it's quite funny. And I guess I love the fact that you're leaning into that so heavily. Have you already mentally prepared and accepted your fate in shaving your hair off?
I have prepared and accepted my fate in shaving my head. I mean, we're still figuring out the exact details of it. Will we live stream it? Won't we live stream it? How long will I go bald for? But yeah, I'm ready. I mean, this is just kind of stuff I think you kind of have to do when you're building an ecosystem, a community. Like, you need to create these moments where you can really bring people together, get them excited, make them believe in something, even if it's silly. And I feel like this is a great one. So we actually didn't come up with this campaign. We've been working with DevFolio on the Onchain Summer Build-a-thon, who've been awesome. They've been incredible. And they pitched it to us like, a week ago. I think a week and a half ago to them, I said, hey guys, how do we make the Onchain Summer Build-a-thon the largest hackathon ever? And they were like, we'll come back with a bunch of ideas. And this is one of them. They made the whole like animated GIF. And I was like, ship it. I love it. Let's do it.
That's amazing. Like you said, you do need to lean into it. Different culture, building communities on chain, etc. And I think you guys are doing a great job of that. So really fun to observe from the outside. But welcome to the Fundamentals podcast. I mean, I've been looking forward to getting to speak with you here for a while now to kind of touch on topics such as, everything behind bringing Coinbase on chain, speak a bit about the Superchain ecosystem, and then also how you're positioned in the market right now, what's coming in the future. So welcome on.
Yeah, super glad to be here. I love Token Terminal's content. I feel like it's, pretty consistently like pushing the thinking in the industry about like how we should think about the data that's happening on chain, how we should think about growth, how we should think about these networks as businesses. And so I was excited when you guys wanted to have me on.
Love to hear that. And I mean, we've been pushing quite a lot of Base content recently. We push the data out that looks good. So you've been doing a good job. The traction's been good. So it's been happy to put that data out there. But I think a great place to start here, maybe to set the stage for speaking about bringing the world on chain, be just the concept of bringing Coinbase on chain,
Yep.
I feel. So first off, Jesse, could you speak a bit about why you decided to build Base as a company within a company?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was a journey. I think like back in 2021, when I stepped out of my previous role running all the consumer businesses on the engineering side for Coinbase and stepped into kind of a new amorphous role of, figuring out what to do next. I had this intuition that, there was something really powerful around the idea of taking Coinbase and all of its trust and users and assets and reputation and kind of moving it into this new paradigm where it would embrace smart contracts more, kind of live more at the edge of crypto. But I think when I kind of started, we didn't really know what that meant. We didn't know exactly what that would look like. And it took us about a year of iterating through different ideas, I think, to ultimately get to a realization, which was that Coinbase itself, even though it's a crypto company, in many ways is like a legacy Web2 company. It started in 2012. It runs on servers that are centralized. It's mostly custodial. And that kind of we're in this inflection point in the broader ecosystem where for the first time, the technology is actually ready to make it so businesses that have been Web2 companies can really like start to move on chain, and they can take the kind of existing network effects, existing distribution they have, and use that to build new valuable network effects and products on chain. So I think that was the first kind of like realization that we had of, there's something really powerful here in this idea of moving Coinbase on chain. And then I think the second big realization we had that ties more directly into Base was that, the best way to do that was going to be to build a product that actually was not just a product, but actually a platform that would kind of let us incrementally move the business on chain by creating a context in which we could actually do that migration. We could build new applications, we could build new products. And that's ultimately what Base is. Base is an open platform. It was built first and foremost for the Coinbase team to make it so they could build applications on chain. And then once we started building it for the Coinbase team, I think the next logical thing for us was like, if we're going to build great tools for Coinbase, why not open it up to everyone and make it so that this is an open platform that anyone can participate in? And kind of that ultimately grew into this, much broader vision today, which is building a global on-chain economy that increases innovation, creativity, and freedom.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that, like you said there, starting from developer platform and what you've alluded to in some previous interviews, I believe that building on top of that, you need to build a flourishing application ecosystem on top of which you can then bring capital markets and bring all of that on chain through it. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing, speaking about kind of previous interviews, one thing that has stuck in my mind, that you said, I believe it was with like A16Z, was you likened Base to AWS. You said that what AWS is to Amazon, you see Base being to Coinbase. Could you elaborate a little bit on this analogy and how that kind of shapes your development strategy?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways to look at that. One is like literally the relationship between Base and Coinbase and AWS and Amazon. I think both came from a similar place, which is that you have, a consumer business that spent a decade building consumer products. And then after a decade, basically said, hey, what if we took the platform that we've been using to build those consumer products and made it available to everyone? And, that was AWS for Amazon. It helped people, helped Amazon run their servers, and now it helps everyone run their servers. And I think it's the same thing for Base, where, Base helped Coinbase kind of run their applications, and now it helps everyone run their applications. I think one thing that's slightly different and actually breaks a little bit with that analogy, which is interesting, is that Amazon actually was running all their stuff on AWS for a while before they externalized AWS. Whereas Coinbase wasn't quite, we kind of had this idea, we still have this idea that we're going to make that migration, but like we are both building Base in the platform and doing this migration where Coinbase could actually re-platform itself on chain on top of Base at the same time. And so I think that is a little different dynamic, which is interesting. The second way that I think that these things are similar is that if you think about AWS to Base analogy, I think that what we are kind of broadly approaching right now with this kind of on-chain transition is almost a wholesale replacement of the way compute has been done for the last 20 years. If you look at compute, the way people have done compute is, they've basically rented servers or they run their own data centers, and those servers have been kind of in closed off kind of private areas where they've ran, EC2 instances, like just get access to a server, run your compute on it. I think that the way we think about Base, the way we think about L2s and really block space in general is that's kind of a next generation compute where you are literally running your compute, you're running your application on these global computers. And in many ways, I think it's almost most analogized to like the serverless compute era. That kind of was like almost a thing, and it's obviously a big thing, but in many ways, I don't think it ever really lived up to its potential. Where folks like Amazon and Azure said, "Hey, we're going to provide this incredible serverless environment where you can just deploy your app and you get access to all these things, and it just works, and you don't have to worry about anything else." But the limitation with that was that you could deploy your app into their serverless environment, but then you really only got access to the APIs that they decide to provide in their serverless environment. And it wasn't connected to anything else. Now, if you look at the on-chain environment like Base, one way of thinking about Base is that it's like the most powerful serverless environment ever invented. Like you can put your application onto Base. You never worry about downtime. It just runs. It is globally available to everyone everywhere. You don't have to worry about load balancing. You don't have to worry about anything. If they have an internet connection, they can access it. And then not only do you have access to the core APIs that Base provides in the form of its node, any other developer in the world can go and add an API to Base in the form of a smart contract. And now you get access to that too. And so you can almost think about Base as this like ever expanding serverless environment where developers are constantly adding new APIs, new capabilities that then other developers can go and build with. And I think that primitive, that sort of compute, a fully serverless, fully open, and fully composable compute platform is a new paradigm. And I think our thesis is that that compute is going to be 10 times better than the legacy compute that was more siloed, that was less effective from a serverless perspective, and that over time, it's actually going to eat all of that legacy compute. And we'll see kind of a lot of compute move to L2, where you need kind of like payments and identity. And then even more compute, probably 10, 100, 1,000 times more, moving to L3, where you can still get those sort of dedicated workloads and have kind of all of the control and customization that you might need if you're just running kind of like large scale applications. But you can do it in a way that's fully connected to the on-chain economy, where you can actually pull in all of those serverless APIs directly into your compute while maintaining that dedicated nature of it. And so I think in that way, I might not say Base is to AWS. I almost say like Base is to EC2. And over the next few years, there's going to be a whole other suite of compute offerings that are L3s on top of Base, that are other interoperability solutions that kind of combine together to create a next generation AWS that no single company controls, but is a global compute platform that's built for everyone.
That's really insightful context. I think you're sharing. And I know it's always tough to build direct analogies for what we're building here in crypto to anything from the traditional world, because there's so much novelty involved. Like you mentioned there, the direction that we're going, kind of setting the playbook for something that hasn't yet been done in any way. But by bringing Coinbase business on chain, you're setting the playbook for bringing millions of other businesses on chain who can then see that, okay, this is how it's done. This is what the benefits are of this.
I think it's true. And I actually think that a lot of times our industry gets like a little wrapped around itself in trying to be novel and trying to be like, well, how do we, we need to invent something that's totally new and different and change people's minds. And I think that might not actually be true. I'm actually pretty convinced at this point it's not true. If we take a lot of the stuff that people have done in Web 2 and then we build it on a platform that is 10 times more accessible and delivers 10 times more value to the users and creators and developers, because you don't have intermediaries that are taking huge taxes, but you still deliver the same products, that might be enough, right? Like it literally might be enough. And I think one of the things that informs a lot of my thinking on this is I come from an engineering background. And so I've been in kind of multiple engineering organizations where I've gotten to see a similar transition happen, which is that you have a really legacy platform that is slow, it's expensive, it takes tons of time to build new things. And then you build a new software platform. And the goal of that new software platform is not to like totally transform the business or build a totally new feature. It is to make it so you can run the same features in the same business way more efficiently, way more cheaply. You can build more things more quickly. And then as you kind of get those things on that new platform, then you can expand the feature set much more aggressively. And I actually think the way I see Base and the way I see kind of the era of crypto that we're in right now is the next best thing that we might see happen over the next few years is that sort of platform transition, where we actually take a bunch of the like stuff that was working pretty well, but was also on these platforms that are pretty broken and have broken incentives and are really slow and are kind of siloed to specific companies, and rebuild those products on this new platform in a way that makes them 10 times better, because the economics are better, the accessibility is better, and the experience is better. And then from there, I think there's going to be a ton of innovation and a ton of creativity, and a ton of new stuff that emerges. But I also think we're just going to do a lot of kind of like bringing things over and making them work, because that's like a big part of kind of these transformative platform changes.
I hear you 100% that although there is novelty involved, conceptually, a lot of the things are not that far from what we have seen before. And especially like at Token Terminal as well. Remember 3-4 years ago when we introduced the frameworks that, hey, we actually don't see these protocols and businesses, on-chain businesses, being any different from traditional platform businesses.
Right, totally. Yeah, and that's one of the things I really love about your guys' kind of reporting and data, is that you actually try and take the existing frameworks that we have and say, hey, what if we apply these to the businesses that are starting to be built on chain? And I saw someone tweeting about DAOs the other day, and they were like, I don't believe in DAOs. Like DAOs are just like, never going to work, and, they're, slow and they can't make decisions. I'm like, well, no, like DAOs are just organizations. And yeah, there's tons of horrible organizations out there. Like you have tons of bad on-chain organizations, you have tons of bad off-chain organizations. But the powerful thing about DAOs is that now we actually have technology that lets us encode governance and decision-making in software. And that can be used to unlock incredible efficiency for organizations. But just because that efficiency is possible because we have the technology doesn't mean that people are actually doing it right now. And I think if you look at most DAOs, like they're actually like not learning any of the lessons. and they're not using the technology in any interesting ways. No, it's not a good idea to have total populism in your DAO with like plutocratic voting dynamics. Like no one would have said that was a good idea in the off-chain world, and it's still not a good idea in the on-chain world. But I think that if you just think like a little bit more expansively about that, which is again, like it's a platform, you could take literally the corporate structure of any organization and rewrite it in smart contracts on that platform, and it would work more efficiently. And then you can go from there. I think that's just a much better lens for kind of conceiving of what's happening right now.
Exactly. I agree with you. And then from our perspective, we should see a 1000x improvement in the stakeholder reporting that running on-chain enables, in addition to the business efficiency.
Right, totally. Imagine if your corporation with the same structure and the same revenue was doing it all on-chain. Well, now it's not quarterly reports that go to the public. It's like literally every block. Now you can see what's happening every block. And that would be 1,000 times better. Right? Literally, it's like what would have previously taken months and months to get the right information, you can now get it every second. And I think that like technology shift in the platform, people often overlook. They're like too quick to jump to, oh, like what's going to be the novel thing? And I'm like, it's not about just the novel thing. That stuff will come too. It's also about upgrading our systems and taking stuff that's just really bad and slow and disconnected and isolated and putting it onto an open, fast, efficient, global platform that just works by default.
Yeah. And someone needs to show everyone else how it's done, because otherwise it's just talk at one point. So I think
and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do.
There we go. And you're doing a great job on that front. And I wanted to kind of maybe dig into the fact of what the team composition looks like tackling this problem, because I know talent density is a topic at Coinbase that is pretty heavily focused on. I think something that got a lot of media coverage even towards the end of last year was that your chief people officer put out a blog where you kind of updated some hiring policies in the sense that CEO and president approval is required for all hires and all this stuff. So like the number one operating priority to attract top talent. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of Base, as you're kind of building a startup within a larger corporation, what does the team there look like, and how have you been able to achieve this group of top talent? Has it been mostly hires from within the Coinbase organization, or any like specific skill sets that you've been looking at to look for externally?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that Coinbase has really been pushing on for the last year and a half. You know, I think we actually went through 2 cycles where I think we overhired, like the 2021 cycle, and then I guess the 2017 cycle before that. And I feel like it took us the second time really to learn our lesson, but I feel like we really learned it the second time. And now there's more of a focus on bringing in top talent than I've ever seen in the business. And I think it's translating to really incredible hires and leading to much more efficiency for the overall business. So I feel super lucky to have Brian and LJ and the rest of the exec team pushing on that. I think Base has been, that's kind of the only world we've lived in. And I think one of the things that's enabled us to do that is we started as a very small team. I was an engineering leader historically, and the team that really started working on Base in its conception in November was me and then 3 other engineers. And so I was kind of doing a product and engineering role, but it was just, engineers shipping code. And I think we saw, whoa, 4 of us can go a really long way on chain. We can build a lot. And we felt, hey, we should savor this. Like, we don't want to grow too quick, too fast. We would rather stay super, super lean and like really engineering driven and kind of see how far we can get before things just like totally break. And so that's kind of been our ethos from the beginning. We've tried to keep the core team incredibly small. And then I think we've been able to lean on a lot of people from across the entire business who just have gotten excited about Base and have been willing to kind of like step into tours of duty. And this is actually one of the most common patterns we've seen is, we'll have a need on the Base team and we'll be like, hey, we need this thing. And someone somewhere out there, historically it was inside of Coinbase, but now we're actually starting to see it happen outside of Coinbase too. Someone will step up to fill that role. They'll do it in their nights and weekends. They'll do it in a volunteer capacity. They'll do it alongside their other job just because they're excited. They're excited about building. They want to be a part of the effort. They want to be a part of bringing things on chain. They want to be a part of Base. And we then get, 3 to 6 months kind of seeing how they do, and also seeing like how long-term is this need? Like how scaled is it? How scoped is it? How do we think about it? And I think that gives us a lot more confidence when we ultimately do bring someone into the team that A, we're bringing in the right person because we have a bunch of game tape. And then B, like we actually need the person. It's not something that was transitory. This is like an essential role that we absolutely have to have. And so that's kind of the way we've been incrementally growing. And we're obviously bigger than 3 people now, but we're not that much bigger. The core team is still very small. It's very heavily weighted towards product and engineering. I think one of the things that we've really benefited from is, the fact that we've had a very strong engineering culture from the beginning. I think that's partially because I'm an engineering leader. It's also partially because our head of engineering and the kind of like CTO figure, Andrew and Michael, are both people who I've worked with now for basically 7 years. Michael joined a month before me at Coinbase. Andrew, I hired about a year into my tenure. And so the 3 of us have just been building this from the beginning, and having that sort of like trust and context and shared perspectives about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we want to run, how we want to work our team. I think it's been a really strong foundation, which has then allowed us to bring in, product and, ecosystem business, marketing, and have a really strong foundation of like core talent and core technical talent that I think could guide kind of where we were going and how we were going to execute. Like one anecdote on that is we didn't have any product people on our team until I guess we had a halftime product person like in like second half of last year, but like a pretty junior person. Like it was me doing product, but I've never done product before. It was just like engineers running the show. And then the first half of this year, like I think in February, we hired a head of product who's also an engineer and who is now obviously doing product stuff and building a product team, but comes from a very strong engineering background. And so I think that's just been a like core part of our culture. It's like being very engineering driven, being very lean, and then making sure that we kind of incrementally phase in any additional talent or roles that we have to make sure A, that they're very needed because we can do so much as a small team building Onchain, and then B, that we're hiring the absolute best person who's like top 5% talent and we know is going to make us way, way better. I think it's working. I look at my, now leadership team, which is kind of like head of product, head of engineering, head of ecosystem, head of marketing, head of legal, head of security. And it's the best team I've ever worked with. There are no B players. It's all A players. And that's rare. It's rare that you get to be on a leadership team and look around and be like, whoa, these are all really strong players. Like we have a high bar that we can keep on raising.
That's amazing to hear. Great position to be in. And it just speaks to the fact as well, the leanness of your team, what you mentioned there is that you can build pretty large operations with a very lean team on chain. And that's like just another benefit that comes from it.
It's totally novel. Like literally you can do 10 times more with 10 times fewer people building on chain. And it's like the simple, if you're listening to it, you're like, this guy's crazy. Okay, look at Uniswap. Uniswap was built by 2 engineers. I have also worked at one of the largest centralized exchanges. I can tell you that it was way more than 2 engineers building the centralized exchange at Coinbase, like multiple orders of magnitude more. And so that is just one illustration, but we see it every single day. The amount of leverage that a single engineer or even a single marketing person can have building on chain is so, so profound because they're able to use all of these reusable tools. It's like now a marketing person can like launch an NFT and then they can do attribution with it and they can do targeting, they can do other NFTs, they can do token gating. Like all of these campaigns can come together in what would have previously taken a bunch of custom software and everything not really working together. It all just works together now, and it means that they can ship incredibly fast and make outsized impact. Even the dev fully, we were talking about the Let's Get Jesse Bulb campaign, which is a hilarious campaign. That came together so fast because it was like, okay, let's create the NFT. And then we can look at the on-chain staking. Did someone stake? If they can stake, then they can mint. Like the pieces are just built to work together, and it enables us to move so much faster than I think has ever been possible before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing we've been thinking about when token terminal UIs probably should introduce like GMV or fees generated per core developer type of metric that can then really be used to benchmark against TradFi analogs or whatever it might be. Really,
yeah, I totally agree with that. Although I think the core we've gone back and forth on all the core developer metrics. I think it's like all these measurements are very hard and require standardization. For instance, on the base team, we have at this point I think like one team, like 8 people working on kind of like core OP stack development. And so one way of looking at it is like there's 8 core developers on base, but I just don't think that that doesn't make sense. There's all these other teams who are working on the OP stack, which is the core technology of Base. There's all these other teams who are building, application level infrastructure on Base, which is really essential. Yeah, it's interesting to think about what is the right way to categorize different developers and categorize the growth of ecosystems. Because I'm not sure it's core developers, because kind of to what you're saying here is we can actually keep our core development team incredibly lean. Like, we don't want to grow our core development team. We would rather have 8 really great people than like 100 engineers doing nothing. Yeah, it's interesting.
It definitely is, but I think like the solution, at least short term, there is to create several different types of cohorts or different type of methodologies.
Right,
for
exactly.
Like
there's core developers, and then there's like on-chain builders.
Yeah, ecosystem developers or whatever they might be, and then just letting the user kind of pick and choose what cohorts they want to compare to which, and then let standardization happen over time.
Yeah, I love it. We need more standardization of data. Man, if we could standardize metrics for like engaged developers and engaged users or engaged addresses, that would be so valuable for the industry. I feel like there's so much like fake news on like social media about people tweeting XYZ graph, and it's just not reflecting anywhere close to reality.
Exactly. But I think that's just the logical next step, because people are starting to understand the noise is there. So we'll
get there.
I know quality filters, which you spoke about at length as well. So those are for sure coming from people using them internally, but also going to add those to the standardized metric you see on analytics platforms. But you mentioned the OP stack there. So I maybe want to zoom out a little bit and just speak about the Superchain ecosystem briefly. You have explained the concept of the Superchain, and it's pretty well documented out there. But what I wanted to ask you is if you could maybe speak a little bit about the core idea behind the chain alliance and why you like that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just to rewind us, when we were thinking about building Base, we'd spent about 6 months trying to decide where we would have built kind of like Coinbase on-chain applications. And that was really kind of like the context. We then came into the decision to build our own L2. We just went and talked to all the teams, and we were like, oh, like maybe we should build our own. And I think one of the things that led us to kind of get to that point was a bunch of conversations we had with Optimism, where we were kind of speccing out what does the future look like, to the limit, how is all of this on-chain compute going to emerge? And I think the thing that we convinced ourselves of was that there were going to be many chains, because there's just going to be so much demand for this kind of compute that like no one chain can serve it all. And so I think once we convinced ourselves that, then I think the next logical question was like, okay, well, should we have one of those chains? And we got to yes. And then the second one of that was like, how are those chains going to emerge? What's the architecture going to be? Like, how are they going to fit together? And I think we convinced ourselves that there were going to be these kind of like groupings of chains that had more connectivity between them. And there's actually 2 like different kinds of connectivity that I think people often kind of overlook the nuances around, but maybe helpful to kind of elucidate. That when we think about kind of like interoperability between L2s, I think the best way to think about it is there's asset fungibility and trustlessness between L2s, where, for instance, could you take an asset from Base and move it to OP mainnet without introducing some new trust assumption? That's one thing. And that can be incredibly high latency. If you can move the asset without introducing trust assumption, like that could happen with a 15-minute move or an hour-long move. But the key thing there is, are you moving assets around between these chains without introducing new trust assumptions? And then there's a second kind of form of interoperability and connection, which is more like, are you getting some level of like atomic composability between blocks, where like you can process transactions on 2 chains with very low latency? And interestingly enough, like those 2 forms of interoperability or connectivity have different properties required in order to achieve them. You can actually achieve like pretty fast interoperability in the same block without net new kind of like dependencies between chains, by having kind of like block builders building the transactions for both of those chains. You can't really have asset fungibility across chains without having some level of trust between chains. Like they need to go back to having some sort of shared bridge contract or shared proving contract that is enabling them to interoperate, barring some of that getting pulled into the L1, for instance, like having a enshrined ZK prover in the L1. I think early on, we actually saw that. We were thinking about all these dynamics. We were thinking about, okay, there's going to be thousands of chains. How are all these things going to interoperate? And we saw the thing that's probably going to be most important here is actually going to be asset fungibility. Can these economies mix and mingle And can you have trustless trade between the economies and in the form of asset fungibility? And I think once we kind of realized that was going to be a big driver of kind of economic growth, I think it felt to us like working with Optimism and working on some sort of structure where we could get that interoperability, we could get that asset fungibility was super important. And that's really what the Superchain is. The Superchain is kind of like a context. It's almost like a trade agreement between chains where they're saying, hey, we are opting in to depend on each other in certain ways and thereby inherit fungibility across each other so that you can have the economies of Base more easily connect to the economies of OP mainnet, to the economy of Worldchain, to the economy of Zora. And I think there's still a lot of technical details to figure out about it. But I think that sort of like economic union is really like the core primitives that you're seeing be formed with both the Superchain from Optimism, but also all of the other kind of chain, offerings, whether that's ZK Stack or, Polygon, Ag Layer. It's all the same idea of like, how do you get fungibility between these chains? And then how do you kind of build the trust required in order to get that?
Yeah, because that is the right direction to move in to kind of solve the issue of fragmented liquidity along the Ethereum stack, as we have a bunch of these chains. I mean, very similar again, if you look at what's happened in the world, you have the European Union. So you're going to have a Superchain union as well. You're going to want to consolidate that liquidity, the freedom to move, etc.
100%. And if you look at like the law of chains and all the documents that we've created and the kind of governance structures, like it actually mirrors other unions. Like we looked at like federalism, we looked at the way the United States Constitution was set up and the like Federalist Papers were written. Like all of those things influence the way we kind of designed the Base OP relationship and the Superchain, the law of chains. And we really think it's like foundational infrastructure that is going to allow these kind of economic unions to emerge.
Yeah. And on that relationship, could you maybe quickly remind us of what the economic arrangement looks like between Optimism and Base?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done a basically like value share between Optimism Collective and Base. And the way that basically works is Base gives a portion of its like overall sequencer revenue. It's the greater of 15% of net revenue, not including L1Ps, or I think 2.75% of gross revenue, including L1Ps. And in exchange for that, Base is basically earning a governance voice in the Optimism Collective. So I think we're earning something like 2.75% of the OP supply over 6 years. And then after 6 years, kind of like the agreement, resets and we have to figure out kind of new terms. I think it's actually like a pretty precedent setting and like boundary pushing agreement. Like it's a public company kind of doing a on-chain agreement with a DAO that's, kind of at the forefront of defining on-chain governance. And, we spent about 9 months working through it. And I think it's a really big win where you get kind of Optimism supporting the entire Base ecosystem. We now get retroactive public goods funding. For instance, there's 10 million OP going to Base builders in this latest round. We get a ton of ecosystem support. And then on the flip side, like we bring a lot of our adoption and usage to Optimism into the broader union and also our revenue driver for kind of what I would consider the federal government, where they're then taking a tax on kind of our local state economy and using that to fund the infrastructure that makes our economy possible.
That's really well said towards the end there. It makes it a lot easier for people to understand all of that.
Yeah, right. Think about it. We're paying taxes to the federal government, and the federal government's giving us a bunch of funding to invest in infrastructure. And then they're building a bunch of federal infrastructure that allows the states to connect more directly and transact more directly and have kind of more connectivity of their economies.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that kind of partially answers the next question that I wanted to ask, which was that you've been very clear, both in terms of what you've said verbally, but also what the metrics show, that Base intends to be the hub of the on-chain economy. And one thing I've been thinking a lot about is because you think of the Superchain and the OP stack, it's OP mainnet. It's kind of a hub within the Superchain. So how do those two concepts align with each other?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that vision of OP mainnet is outdated at this point. I think when we actually started working with Optimism, the Superchain wasn't a thing really. Like it was something that Carl had said, in a talk maybe, but we didn't really have a conception of what that was. And really at that point, Optimism's go-to-market was they were building a chain. It was called Optimism. It was L2. And then as we kind of firmed up what Base was, we started building it. We worked on the law of chains. I think really like together, we created this vision of the Superchain, which was going to be many chains that all work together to scale Ethereum. And if you look today, there's a dashboard that I saw, like the vast majority of net new chains are being built on the OP stacks. I think there's something like 25 OP stack, L2s out in the market, and the next best one is like 4 or something like that. And so it's pretty clearly the market leader in terms of technology stack for building chains. But I think what's shifted was, whereas kind of pre-base, OP mainnet was the product from Optimism, post-base and post is kind of embracing the Superchain, Optimism is the union. And OP mainnet is just one of the states in the union. I actually liken it to Washington, D.C. It's maybe not even a state, right? It's like a district that holds the governance of the broader union, which is a really important role. But just like Washington, D.C. isn't both the seat of government for the United States and the largest economy in the United States, that's California, I don't expect OP mainnet to be the seat of governance and the largest economy in the Superchain. Like those two things, I think, almost run in conflict. Because in order for Optimism to become its broader self, to become the union, you kind of have to give up the dream of the individual district being the whole thing. And so I actually feel like this is a thing that Optimism has maybe done better than anyone else, and they deserve a lot of credit for, is they've like innovated themselves into their almost irrelevance for OP. Not irrelevance. Irrelevance is maybe too hard, but they've been willing to take that leap where it's like, we are willing to bet on this vision so much that we're willing to fund Base equally to OP mainnet. And we're willing to let 1,000 chains bloom, even if that means taking away activity from OP mainnet, because we believe so fundamentally in this future that OP mainnet is just one part of. And I think that innovating yourself out of that, like taking that leap of faith, that's very challenging. And most people will not disrupt themselves. But I think Optimism has done it. And I think it's paying off because when I look at the thing that they're building with the Superchain, I think it's going to be incredibly important, impactful. It's going to be the largest economy in the world. And I think that it's going to be all part of Optimism.
So Optimism is okay with the fact that Base will be the hub Superchain.
Yeah, I mean, look, like Optimism's not playing favorites either. They're not saying, hey, we're going to anoint Base the hub, right? Just like the federal government doesn't go and say, hey, we're going to anoint California the hub. But I do think that like Base has we're the first to market. I think we're running an incredibly effective go-to-market. If you look at all the metrics today, we are the market leader across builders, across users, across volume. And I think that we're very well positioned to kind of extend that lead even further and thereby, become the natural organic hub, because this is the place where most of the activity is, where most of the assets are. And that actually brings a ton of value to the Superchain, because all of the other chains in the Superchain are going to have trustless interoperability, connectivity, and fungibility of the assets that exist on Base to bring into their economy. And so I think what Optimism has kind of done is they've said, hey, we're creating a free market. We're letting go of our baby to capture the broader dream. And we're going to support everyone to kind of connect together and build this broader union, which should be much bigger than something we could have built by ourselves.
Definitely. I think it almost feels like a very unfair advantage given the position you're in. You have both Coinbase behind you and all the synergies that come with that, but then you also have Optimism. Everything comes with the OP stack and Superchain and the benefits that they're able to provide. So that's just an amazing.
Yeah, when we were working on this, we said, name a more iconic duo, Coinbase and Optimism. I mean, you have the largest, most scaled crypto business in the world that has the best brand in the world. And then you have who I think is like the market leader in decentralization and on-chain governance, and probably has the best brand in crypto from a like DAO perspective. And I think those two things are like an incredibly potent combination. And then I think the thing that is like really the X factor is I think a lot of people think that the like differentiator with L2s is going to be the pure technology of the chain. I don't think that. I think that the differentiator of L2s is going to be governance. It is who can build the biggest effective government that brings together hundreds or thousands other governments to effectively work together and effectively distribute resources and effectively spur innovation. That's hard. And when I look at the intentionality and the thought and the care and the progress that Optimism has made on its governance, it is so far ahead of everywhere else, so far ahead. Like, look at RPGF. Of course, it's not perfect. There's stuff we can improve. But in terms of creating a culture of build and you will be rewarded, show your work, I think it's done it better than anyone else. I look at the effectiveness of the governance forums, even in Optimism. Like, you don't see the same sort of chaos in politics that you see in other places. I think they are really setting a tone for what's possible. How can we build these, next generation organizations? And that was one of the big reasons that we wanted to kind of work with them, because we said, hey, Coinbase, we have a lot of strengths, but one of the things we are clearly not is we're not an on-chain organization. We're a centralized public company. And so it felt like if we could take all of those strengths and then combine it with someone who is really pushing the limits of what's possible and setting the kind of best in class standard for building on-chain organizations, that combination was going to be incredibly potent. And I think it's proving to be.
I agree with you 100%. It's not going to be a tech thing anymore. You don't need to improve the tech. Of course, there are open research problems that need to be solved in scaling these things, but it's
people will solve
governance
them.
and business
And it will
development.
all be open source, because it all should be open source. And then the best economies will take in those open source improvements and they'll keep growing. And so I think what we're most focused on is, how do we design incredibly effective governance to make it so that the social and kind of like on-chain economic systems that we're building can last for literally centuries. And then B, how do we run an incredibly effective go-to-market so that we can bring as many humans, whether they're users or builders, into the on-chain economy and get them to experience how much better their life can be if they build on-chain, if they live their life on-chain. And I think if we can do those things, if we can build efficient governance systems that kind of shape these economies in the right ways, and then we can onboard everyone into those efficient governance systems, we're going to have an incredibly potent economy. And that's, again, what we're building. We're building a global on-chain economy that increases innovation, creativity, and freedom.
Exactly. And again, like, to just analyze the real life, no different from the fact that I moved myself and my businesses from Finland to Switzerland because better governance, in my opinion.
Right.
And on chain, the kind of cost of changing, there's much less friction to do that. So we're just going to see things consolidate to the places where the governance is the best and the best environment to deploy a business onto and run your business. And if you don't like it, you change.
Exactly. So it's pretty special what I think is coming together. And if you're out there listening to this podcast, you want to build with people and you want to be a part of the fastest growing economy on chain and fastest growing global economy, I think today, we'd love to build with you.
Definitely. Now, on the competition side, you have a pretty killer setup there with some very established, trustworthy brands in the crypto space together, crazy flywheel going on. Who do you view as the most relevant competition for Base then? Is it like crypto native startup L2s, or are you more thinking of it from the perspective of like fintech incumbent that might start to build on-chain products and the likes?
Yeah, I don't think about competition too much. I find it's like generally much more distracting than it is helpful. And I think we are still so early in the game that, especially in the crypto world, it doesn't feel that productive to me. If I had to pick one competition, it's off-chain. If you look at the number of people who are on-chain today, it's like really on-chain, it's like less than 1 million people globally daily. Like, it's just not that many people. And that means that we have 4 orders of magnitude of growth that we need to do, where we need to, beat the off-chain products for 4 orders of magnitude more people. And so that's what I'm focused on. It's like, how do we get this infrastructure and the applications that are built on top of the infrastructure so good that in a side-by-side comparison, when people have to choose between off-chain products and on-chain products, they choose on-chain products every single time. And I actually think we're closer to that than people realize. And in particular, I think we're closer to that than people realize because people have been very acclimated to this analogy of crypto as the internet, where it's like we see the arc and it's like, oh, we're like tracking the internet of adoption. But crypto is a very different deployment lifecycle than the internet, because the internet required getting new hardware to everyone in the world. Like, literally, you couldn't use the internet until you had a cell phone. Or even before that, you couldn't use the internet until you had a hardwired Ethernet connection that let you get, a meg down or something like that. That sort of scaled infrastructure investments in terms of hardware is very expensive and very slow. But crypto is not like that. Anyone, anywhere with a mobile phone today can access crypto. It's just that the products and the software has sucked. It's been very bad, unusable. But the second that flips, where it's like, oh, now on a head-by-head, the on-chain products are better than the off-chain products, I think that the growth curve is going to look a lot more like consumer internet products of the last decade than it is going to look like internet adoption over the last 2 decades. And what we're going to see is going from 0 or essentially 0 to 100 or like 1 billion users in the same curve as a TikTok or a Facebook or like even the most aggressive, like latest social apps, because you're really just deploying these things to hardware devices that already exist. I feel the same way about commerce. Like, I think everyone has been very acclimated to, oh, this is going to look a lot like tap to pay. where it's going to take 15 years to do tap to pay. I'm like, no, like the thing that was really hard about tap to pay was you had to deploy tap to pay terminals to all of the different businesses. And you had to have them have hardware that could support tap to pay in all those different places. But now the hardware is already there and the tap to pay devices are already there. All it needs is for people to build an app that does tap to pay crypto or have a QR code that shows on the screen. And that's it. The hardware is already there. You just do a software upgrade. And that can happen 10 times faster than hardware. And so I think that people have been very acclimated over the last decade to thinking this is going to take 30 years. It's going to look like the internet. And I feel like the first infrastructure phase has taken us a long time and probably looks a lot like the early days of the internet. But now, because of all the already deployed hardware, this next phase where we have product market fit, now we need to scale that product market fit, is going to happen much faster. It's going to look a lot more like traditional consumer internet technology adoption.
Yeah, definitely. Can't wait to see that hockey stick curve really take off. And I believe that you're looking at a lot of data to see where we are on that curve right now and building that conviction towards it. So just finally here, maybe wanted to ask that, what are the most valuable insights on chain right now for Base's growth and decision-making processes? Would you be able to share maybe like an example of how you're utilizing data for decision-making?
I mean, I think one of the things that most people don't really realize about Onchain is that it's probably the most powerful like attribution and targeting platform that businesses have ever had access to. And so one of the things that we use on-chain data a lot for with Base is actually our go-to-market. Every single event that Base is running today has some on-chain attribution attached to it. Like we get people to claim an NFT. We do an attestation that they were there. You get them to stake for the hackathon. We're putting some record of this user with this address participated in this event. And what that then enables us to do is we can basically do full life cycle attribution of like, where did this user come from? We can do full life cycle customer value of what did they deploy? How much revenue did those contracts make? We can do full customer value on the other side, which is what apps did they use? How far did they build? It's all open. And then not only can we do that with our data, we can layer in all the other data where we can say, oh, this address has Gitcoin passport that's X high. Or this address has WorldCoin, which means that when you combine those things, we know that's a guaranteed human, or at least a very high likelihood that's a human. And so that then allows us to segment our audience of like, here are, human developers, here are the deployment contracts that they're using, here are the people who are just spinning up a bunch of addresses to spam. And then we can use all of that to basically look at our retention curves and be like, oh, we're retaining these people much better. These are the apps that people are using that let them come back every single day. These are what developers are doing that really help them be successful. And I think all of that data, it's just there. It's open. It's an open substrate that everyone's participating in creating. And users still own the data, but anyone can build on top of it. And I think this is like, it's not well understood. Like most people just don't understand. And I feel like I'm like second guessing myself telling on this podcast that people should know this, but it's the most powerful thing that we do day to day is we use on-chain data to make decisions. We use on-chain data to attribute the kind of like what our customers, developers, users are doing. And then we use it to help them be more successful because we have so much kind of insight into what's working, what's not working, that we can actually help people do that.
Yeah. Yet again, adding stuff to the benefits of building on-chain, massive edge for builders who do understand this. That's the core theme here.
Not only can it help you make great decisions, it can help you build better products. And I gave an example of this earlier. It's like the Let's Get Jesse Bald campaign, which go to letsgetjessebald.com and you can sign up for the on-chain summer build-a-thon and mint a bald NFT. The reason that was so easy to build is because we already had a component of our sign-up flow for the hackathon where we require people to stake some ETH. And so we can just go and be like, oh, in order to claim the NFT, you must have staked ETH. That's like an easy requirement to add to any NFT. And it's just there because it was on chain. And so that composability, it's like the greatest accelerant of our ability to move fast and ship innovative things.
100%. But hey, Jesse, thank you a lot. This was based, to say the least. I had all the information about, on-chain summer build-a-thons and everything to the description for anyone that wants to build on Base or learn more.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you so much for pushing the industry forward with all token terminals data. It's really awesome to see. And if you're a builder and you want to build on Base, you can go to base.org. We are doing on-chain summer starting at the beginning of June. It kicks off with a month-long hackathon, month-long build-a-thon, 200 ETH, at this point, way more than 200 ETH worth of prizes. Anyone can participate no matter where you are in the world. We'd love to build with you. And if we get Base to 10 billion TVL by at any point, I'm going to go bald. And so there's a good carrot for you. Help us get me bald.
Awesome.
Looking forward to that. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.